This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
I'm at Jason Hartman's event, and I found that this event is really helpful because I'm totally a newbie to real estate investment. And so far I found it extremely helpful in looking at this as a sort of less risky way of investing in real estate. And it's been really an amazing event for me because all the content has been extremely helpful with what I want to get into.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 1955. Thank you so much for joining me today as we are still recovering from Empowered Investor Live in Scottsdale, kind of catching up on so much to do after the event. Remember, I've identified these 6 different things that the government can do to get us out of the massive debt trap that we're in, the debt and unfunded mandate or unfunded entitlement trap, whichever way you want to say it, that is coming at us. I mean, no business or no household could ever be run the way the U.S. government is run, or any government for that matter. I mean, you know, I don't want to say any government. I'm sure there's like 3 governments out of the 200-ish governments, depending on which way you look at it, or countries, I should say, in the world that are run in a fiscally sound manner. But the vast majority of them are not. They're all borrowing against the future for the present. Well, that's fine as a strategy for investing with inflation-induced debt destruction. We all know that because we basically align our interests with the most powerful forces that the world has ever known, governments and central banks. And talked about that many, many times over the many, many years I've been doing this show. But let's look at some specifics that I just found recently. I thought they were just interesting because this will bring to light the incredible burden of debt that the U.S. government is facing. So if you're watching on video, you see these charts on the screen. If not, I will just briefly go over them. But government spending, fiscal year 2022, Social Security, 19% of all government spending. Health, now these things are, you know, broad categories, right? And there were other charts in this article that broke it down as to what these are, but I'm just covering the broad strokes here, obviously. 15% of spending, income security. Boy, that's a broad category. I bet that means a whole bunch of pork barrel stuff. 14%, national defense, 12%. And what's interesting about that number, by the way, I just want to point something out. We've already got on income security and health, right, these 2 super broad categories, 29% of all government spending. Yet the left, the liberals, will complain that there's too much military spending, but that's only 12%. Now, I'm not in favor of the military industrial complex. I think it's an absolute scam. Of course, I am patriotic about our country. I like the U.S. I like its founding ideas. Of course, it's been all ruined and perverted in so many ways, sadly. But, you know, overall, it's still a pretty great country. And the question is always compared to what? Hopefully, things will get back on track. And someday we can move toward a world of less corruption, less crony capitalism, and all of that stuff. But I am on the verge of going down a big tangent alert and a rabbit hole. And you know what? I'm not going to do it. So let's move on. And then now we add Medicare, another 12%. I mean, these are all basically social programs so far, right? Then education, training, employment, Social Security services, another 11%. So just look at all of that before we even get to our troops, our veterans who've made such incredible sacrifices that only get 4% of government spending. So we've got what? 15%, for health, 14% for income security, 12% national defense, we'll take that out. So we got 29% plus 12% for Medicare. Okay, so now we are up to 39%, 41%. And then let's add another 11%. We're up to 50 for education, training, employment, social services, right? We're up to what's that? 52% of the economy, or 52% of all government spending is on essentially some form of welfare, right? I didn't count Social Security in there because that shouldn't be counted. That's a savings account or an investment account, supposedly, right? Which it's definitely not, but that's what it was designed to be and should be. But of course, the politicians have put their hands in the cookie jar and they ruined that too. So you can see that the military spending argument is invalid. Okay, just a little side note. So here we go in terms of actual dollars. Well, billions and trillions of dollars is the breakdown, and there's the percentage on that side. So you get the idea. Okay, let's talk about credit scores for just a moment. Probably everybody listening knows all about FICO scores, and they understand how a FICO score is calculated to some degree. I've talked many times before on prior episodes about how there's not just one FICO score. There are several FICO models that are used. But do you know about the Vantage score? The Vantage score was just adopted for lenders to use who are selling off loans or delivering loans, as they say, to Fannie and Freddie, the two big secondary market buyers, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. And the Vantage score is a little different than the FICO score, and I thought I would just go over that with you for just a moment. So before we dive into that, though, I want to talk to you about the credit quality of Americans, right? Because this is an important indicator as to where the economy is going, where the housing market, and the future availability of credit. In other words, if you have a population with very low credit scores where their credit is beat up, obviously lenders are going to be reticent about lending to these people. You know, that goes without saying. And if you have a situation where those scores are low, the flip side of that indicator is that why are they low? Well, obviously it shows that consumers are having problems. They're in over their head, they can't pay their bills, et cetera, et cetera. So what you see here is that in terms of FICO scores, 67% of all Americans have a FICO score that is considered good, very good, or exceptionally high. Let me break that down. Good is a score. Now, it doesn't say which FICO model this is. Again, the FICO model for credit cards, auto loans, mortgages, those are different models used. And they're close. The numbers will not be extremely far off. So again, they're just taking FICO scores. I don't know, maybe they're averaging all the models. I'm really not sure how they did this, but whatever. The point is that overall, the population has pretty darn good FICO scores. And 21% of them have a good credit score. 670 to 739 is considered good. 25% of the population has a very good FICO score, which is 740 to 799, very good. And 21% of the population has an exceptional FICO score, exceptionally high, which is 800 to 850. Now, I will tell you that since I really started paying better attention to my own credit scores, I don't think I've ever had an exceptional credit score. Well, maybe on one of the bureaus, I've popped up above 800. And here's the thing I want to say again, which I have said over the years. Look at, compare this to working out, right? If you're working out and you're going to the gym or you're exercising, whatever, right? When you're doing that, you're trying to make gains in your fitness level. And what happens when you're regularly exercising? Well, if you're pushing yourself, if you're trying to get to the next level of better fitness, you're going to be sore, right? You're going to be sore because you're exerting yourself. And I have always found it ironic and funny that people, they put this on social media. It's like stupid. I see this on Facebook. They're bragging about their FICO scores being so high. Here's what that really means. That really means they're not pushing themselves. They're not extending themselves. They're not using their credit enough. When you look at a balance sheet, a traditional balance sheet only includes assets and liabilities. But you know the asset they forget to include is their ability to borrow, their ability to use credit for investing. And if your FICO score is too high, I submit to you that you're not using it enough. Now, the way scores are calculated is a complex, well, it's not too complex, but it's a little bit complex. Blend of credit utilization, credit capacity versus utilization, your utilization ratio, your payment history, yada, yada, yada. We've gone over that on prior shows and how you can improve your scores. But suffice it to say that it's like the person who is not doing anything in life, right? So they never fail because they never try, okay? I don't think you want a very high credit score. You want a good one. You want to be in the very good range, right? 740 to 799. That is very good. It's really all you need most of the time, right? And that shows that you're using your credit. And you want to use your credit. You want to use your body. So your body should be sore sometimes because you're using it. You're trying to grow it. You're trying to be more fit than you were previously. So you're going to be a little bit sore because you're pushing yourself. So this whole idea of bragging about your high credit score is silly, okay? It should be good, very good. Ideally, you bump into that exceptional mark sometimes. But most people bragging about their super high credit score, they're not using their score. Remember, like in traditional real estate, I remember one time sitting at the table negotiating a deal with an agent she was a bit of a loser, okay? And she said to me that she never had a deal fall through. She never had an escrow fall out. And then I asked her, how many transactions did you do last year? She said 4. Well, clearly you have 100% batting ratio because you're not getting up to bat very often. Now, I think that same year I did around 120 transactions. I had a few fall out. Okay. You know, if you do more stuff, you're going to have more failures because you're doing more things, right? Look, if you take long walks, eventually as you take a lot of long walks, you're going to step into some dog poop once in a while, right? If you never walk, you'll never step in any dog poop. I don't know if that's a good metaphor. If you never drive, you'll never get a ticket or have a car accident. But if you drive a lot and you put yourself out there and take more risk and have more exposure, you're going to have a car accident once in a while. You're going to have a ticket once in a while, right? So you get the idea. So Vantage scores are different, of course. Only 61% of Americans have a fair or better Vantage score. So the Vantage scoring system, this would indicate that it is a higher criteria, a more difficult criteria. So what is considered fair on the Vantage scale? 601 to 660. Good is considered 661 to 780. And excellent is considered 781 to 850. 13% have fair Vantage scores, 38% have good Vantage scores, and 23% have excellent Vantage scores. Now, this explains it reasonably well, so I got it here for you. It can take less time to establish a Vantage score than a FICO score. So that long credit history is not as critical on a Vantage score. So if you're younger or newer to the credit game or a foreign national who has created a life in the United States, you're going to be looked at more favorably in terms of the Vantage scoring model. Okay, it can produce a score with just a month or two of consumer credit opening a credit account, right? A FICO scores require 6 months of credit history. Now, that's not all, of course. It requires more than that, but it can start to kind of rank for you really quickly. Another difference is that some consumers who can't be scored by most FICO models because of a limited credit history can still get a Vantage score. So what this Vantage model is doing is letting more people into the credit game. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is what it is. We'll see, I guess, right, as this is more widely adopted. I can tell you that the FICO scoring model has a zillion flaws to it. A zillion flaws. And I've talked in the past about how they are proposing new credit scoring models that take into account up to 1,000 data points. I'm not kidding. Okay. All sorts of things. And this gets a little bit scary, a little bit Orwellian, hey, 1984, because it sort of blends in with the social credit score model that we all should be very concerned about. And we do not want, I don't know. Sometimes I think I want that kind of thing. I think one place we do need a social scoring model is infidelity, cheaters, and scumbags. Because in the game of love, there are a lot of just really awful people. And why aren't they ever held accountable? It's awful. Look, in the game of business, right, you can be held accountable, and that's through litigation and reputation, right? And hey, it's not always fair, but nothing's always fair. And at least on the litigation accountability factor or the government regulation accountability factor, you will at least in theory have the opportunity to fight back and to represent yourself and to protect yourself from that attack, right? And hopefully if you're a bad person, you get nailed. And if you're a good person, you get exonerated. And, that's more your word used in criminal cases, but whatever, you get the idea. You win the lawsuit, right? Or you lose the lawsuit. Certainly there are a million flaws with that, but at least there is some mechanism of accountability. Whereas in the game of love, there is no mechanism of accountability. In fact, it's like reverse accountability. The worst people seem to do the best. It's totally unfair. So maybe we do need a social scoring model, at least for that, but not like China has it, okay? Because that's too Orwellian, it's too Big Brother. Anyway, tangent alert right there. And you can tell I have some energy around that, right? Okay, so Vantage Score Model 3.0. This is not the one that was recently adopted, by the way, by loans delivered to Fannie and Freddie. That's Vantage 4.0. But here's 3.0. I don't have the 4.0 information in front of me. It ignores past paid collections. So, and this is ridiculous, right? We really got to look at the way credit scoring is done in this country because it's not right. But here's a common collection that I've had on my credit report, and you probably have too. You move, and there's that stupid frickin' cable box that they rented to you, the cable company, and the cable company doesn't really want the cable box back because now they're using newer cable boxes, and they make it impossible to return the fucking cable box, right? That's what they do. They do it on purpose. And then some collection for $75 shows up on your credit report that you didn't know was there. Here's one way we should correct credit scoring in this country. Just like litigation, you should, as the party on the other end who's having some negative thing put on your credit report, they should be required to notify you. There's no requirement. So you have to sign up for a monitoring service, and you have to constantly spend time looking at your credit score, looking at your report, and monitoring it. It's a huge pain. And those things are written with hieroglyphics. Like, who knows how to read a credit report, right? I mean, I have some experience in that, but most people don't. Okay, so really, there are so many flaws with the system, but whatever. But the new FICO 9 model, now FICO 8 is the one that's very commonly used, FICO 5 and FICO 8, and the upcoming FICO 10 model and 10T, I'm not familiar with those at all, any of those. If you pay a collection, right, you pay the past collection, it's not going to affect your score. And I think that's fair. That's the way it should be because you paid it. You satisfied the collection. But what bugs me is the notification issue, right? That's the problem. Okay. How much does a late mortgage payment weigh on your credit score? Well, on the Vantage, it's going to weigh more heavily than other late payments. Ew. Be careful on those mortgages. Make sure you pay them on time, right? And all late payments can damage your scores, but mortgage payments are going to have a heavier weight. So keep in mind about that. Allows just 40 days for rate shopping for a car or mortgage. Ooh, that's a tough one. FICO allows 45 days. What does that mean, rate shopping? Well, when you shop around and you apply for credit at different places, you're going to get all these inquiries on your credit report. But what they say is if you do it all at once, because look, you're shopping for a car and you're going to spend 45 days shopping for a car and shopping for financing for that car or that mortgage. Under FICO, you have 45 days where those multiple inquiries will only count as one, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but that's how I interpret this. Whereas on the Vantage model, you only get to shop for 2 weeks, 14 days. And they're counting that on the 15th day, if you get another inquiry, now you got 2 inquiries, which are lowering your score. So I don't like that. The Vantage Scoring model does make allowances for consumers affected by natural disasters. So earthquake, hurricane, tornado, floods, whatever, right? They're going to allow some leniency for that type of thing, which, I guess that's fair. One thing though, of course, people will cheat on that. So, they might live in earthquake affected area or a hurricane affected area or, whatever. And they'll claim they were affected by it when they really weren't because, these things are somewhat surgical in the way they affect people. Sometimes they're broad and they affect everybody in the area, but mostly, you might be affected, but your neighbor's not necessarily affected, right? Depending on the age and construction of your house or whether your house is up higher on the hill than your neighbor's house that was flooded. There's a million things to that. All right. So anyway, I hope that's helpful to you in understanding these scores. Here are the Vantage scoring factors. Okay. So 34% is amounts you owe, and that comprises the utilization of your credit, which means how much credit do you have available versus how much are you using. So if you have $100,000 in credit available and you're using $20,000 of that credit, that's a pretty good utilization ratio because you're only using 20% of your available credit. But if you have $100,000 available and you've maxed it out, that's going to look really bad. It's going to lower your score. Balances, well, that's part of utilization, so 11%, and available credit, 3%. So all of that is utilization. Payment history, 40% of the score is payment history. That's the biggest component, okay? 5% is recent credit applications. Those are those inquiries we were talking about. And 21% is the depth of credit. So how long are your relationships with your creditors and how good is that relationship, right? The depth of that credit. Okay, so I hope that's helpful on Vantage Scoring. Now, I have some news about our cruise. Hey, that rhymes. News about the cruise. A lot of you who came to Empowered Investor Live told me you were signing up for the cruise and you were super excited. So immediately when I got back, I emailed our cruise planner and here's what she said to me. This is the exact email she sent me. Jason, sorry to tell you, but at this point, there is one interior cabin left. Now, we didn't even offer interior cabins because we thought, hey, look, our group wants a balcony, okay? Right? So we only offered balconies, the much nicer cabins on the ship. And there are 3 balconies left on the whole ship. So I can't see promoting this sailing at all, as these cabins will probably be gone within the next few days. So what do? Now, this was yesterday. I got this email yesterday. You need to go to empoweredinvestor.com/cruise immediately and sign up for the cruise, like right now. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Do it now. And of course, everything is subject to availability. We don't run the cruise line. When you buy that ticket, it is not like an instant booking, okay? It's simply signing up. And of course, you'll be refunded if you don't get a cabin on the cruise ship. But this is a giant cruise ship, and it's almost completely sold out. Some of you have already signed up, and that's great. We forward that to our travel agent right away, and she will get you booked. So again, subject to availability, folks, but do it now, and hopefully you'll get something. Literally 4 rooms on the entire ship are available. So do it now. Okay, so that's empoweredinvestor.com/cruise. But not to worry, we will book another cruise, maybe in the fall or something like that. So there will always be another thing coming up, but that's what we have for now.
Do you ever wonder why mass inflation is still a threat to rich countries? Some countries are privileged to have stable currencies. As the reserve currency of the world, the US dollar has enjoyed an enviable position that most countries would die to have. Except for the 1970s stagflation scare, the US has cruised along without many inflationary hiccups in its recent history. Some countries haven't been so lucky. At one point, Venezuela was one of Latin America's wealthiest countries. In fact, its wealth was so impressive that by the 1950s, it became a magnet for migration from countries like Italy, Portugal, and Spain. Oil was its primary export, but it had a growing steel and mining industry as well. Its currency, the Bolivar, was one of the strongest currencies in Latin America. In this regard, Venezuela was indeed exceptional, because Latin American currencies tended to be very volatile. However, in the 1970s, Venezuela's economic model began to change. In the middle of that decade, its oil industry was nationalized. From there, the Venezuelan state began to embark on massive spending ventures and relied on high oil prices to finance such largesse. But when oil prices plummeted, economic realities set in. Government programs do not come cheap. Eventually, someone must pay the bill. In 1983, the Bolivar underwent its most significant devaluation to date, ending a relatively unblemished track record for the nation's currency. Although many believed that this was a temporary setback, things never went back to normal in Venezuela. Towards the end of the 1980s and the early 1990s, the country attempted a series of market-based reforms with limited degrees of success. That said, the government could never contain the inflation beast. In 1989, inflation stood at 84%. Poverty was growing, and the Venezuelan populace was growing restless. Eventually, they took to the streets, with some protesters resorting to acts of violence. The government response was rather brutal, leaving hundreds of people dead. Known as the Caracazo in 1989, this crackdown was a major turning point in modern Venezuelan history. Venezuela's otherwise robust democracy started to be called into question. To make matters worse, a rising lieutenant colonel by the name of Hugo Chavez launched 2 failed coup attempts against the government in 1992. Although Chavez was imprisoned for his actions, the damage was already done. On top of that, none of the country's structural economic problems, such as inflation, were ever really addressed. Inflation reached near triple digits, 100% in 1996, and continued eating away at everyday Venezuelan savings. By 1998, when Chavez threw his hat in the country's presidential race, Venezuelans were completely infuriated at the political system and pulled the lever for the former lieutenant colonel, who marketed himself as the anti-system candidate at the time. Unfortunately, Chavez's rule did not fundamentally address Venezuela's economic problem. In fact, his administration arguably made the situation worse, especially with regards to inflation. This goes to show that there is strong institutional inertia in politics, and even when so-called reformers come onto the scene, they're unable to roll back the policies their predecessors put in motion. Chavez's successor, Nicolás Maduro, has also failed to tame the country's inflation scourge. According to recent figures from the statistics website Statista, Venezuela's current inflation rate is hovering around 2,300% to 6,000%, which is considered hyperinflationary. From a big picture view, inflation has been a hallmark of the Venezuelan economy for the past few decades. Here's some perspective. The last time inflation was below double digits was in 1983. In effect, the average Venezuelan millennial has never witnessed a year with inflation below 10%. Here's the thing about economic upheavals. They can wreck even the best of nations, and they usually can't be controlled regardless of who is in charge. There's a lesson here, and Jason has taught you this many times. You can't control the political or economic elements. but you can take advantage of crises and benefit from them. While I doubt that inflation will reach Venezuelan heights, you should always remain vigilant about the U.S.'s economic climate. Currently, there are debates about whether the U.S.'s inflationary spell will be transitory or more durable. Jason tends to believe in the latter. Nevertheless, you should never lose your cool and think the whole world is doomed. To the contrary, inflationary moments provide a host of new opportunities for real estate investors to thrive in. And they can do so by using Jason's favorite four-letter word, debt. In this case, he's referring to mortgage, not consumer debt. Consumer debt is a big no-no in his book. But taking on a mortgage is a different story. You see, this kind of debt is an asset when inflation hits. First, you acquire an income property. Then you rent it out to a tenant. In doing so, the tenant picks up the carrying cost of the mortgage. Meanwhile, the mortgage's real value depreciates due to inflation. This infuriates the banks but creates a great opportunity for you. So learn from Jason and take advantage of his inflation-induced debt destruction strategy. It's a great time to be alive. For more information, visit jasonhartman.com.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.